In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable 80s cake. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. Real quick, if you want to just skip the intro and get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate the 80s themed cake. And like always, I'm going to start with cakes that are iced in buttercream, and I refrigerate all of my cakes so the icing is hard and solid when I work with it and I'm not going to mess it up. I ice cakes in American buttercream and I refrigerate all of my cakes. So I have videos showing you how I do that, and I will link it below. And I will also tell you how I came up with the concept for this design and how much I charged. So let's get into the video.
All right, I'm starting with clean hands as always. I have some black marshmallow fondant. I'm breaking off a chunk of it and putting that in the microwave. It's about a pound of fondant to cover a 7-inch cake. Need that together. And I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator so the icing is solid. I'm not going to mess this up. And I have some piping gel and a paintbrush. I'm going to paint piping gel all down the sides of the cake and then get a little bit of water and thin that piping gel out and wipe off the board so the fondant doesn't stick to it. I have a full tutorial showing you how I cover cakes in fondant, and I will link that below. So I set the cake aside, and now I'm rolling out the fondant pretty thin and putting it on top. Pull out the wrinkles and smooth down the sides. Use my fondant smoother to press the fondant down to the board and use my little weird pinch technique that is covered in my video and cut off the excess. Smooth the fondant with a piece of fondant, and look how pretty it looks. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now, all my fondant has this Tylose powder in it. I will link it below. I have a cutting board with a piece of non-skid pad underneath so it doesn't slide around, a wet paper towel, an X-Acto knife, a Dresden tool. It has a thin end and a wider end, and a needle tool and a paintbrush with some water. Those are all the tools I always have. I rolled out some red fondant, pretty thick. And I measured my cake. I measured everything that I'm printing out. I print out the size that I need it, and we're using my trace, cut, and smooth technique. So I'm just tracing the outline of the ghost and the inside of the eyes because I'm going to make the eyes a little bit bigger, but now I know where to put them. And whenever I cut anything out of thicker fondant, I do a shallow cut first. So I have a line to follow, and then I will put my blade all the way down to the board and cut it out. This way I don't mess out the fondant. And I always smooth my cuts after I cut anything out. So flip it over, run my fingers over the back, over the jagged edges, and flip it over again. Use my fingers, use my tools, just anything I can do to make it look nice and pretty. So these cutters look like they're the same size as the eyes. So I cut thin white fondant, and I'm going to put that down. And then I also cut thin blue fondant for the eyeballs. And these are just piping tips. I just find random sizes that happen to be the right size. And set him back on top so I could realign him, make sure he's in the right shape. And same thing for the PacMan. PacMan's super easy. Let's find a circle cutter that's the same size and cut him out. Smooth my cuts as always. And I'm just going to cut his mouth. Super simple. Smoothing that out as well. And cutting an eyeball. PacMan's so easy. And let's realign him and set him aside. Now for the name, I wanted to do yellow on black on pink. I printed out her name in the PacMan font. I can link that below. And I'm doing the same thing. This is thinner yellow fondant with Tylose mixed in. And I'm tracing the letters and making sure I get the inner detail as well. Just make sure you don't press too hard. You don't want to poke a hole in the fondant. Peel it away. And I'm just deepening the detail on those inner angles with my Dresden tool. And then using my knife to cut everything out, smoothing my cuts and realigning it on top, and do that for all the letters. This E can get a little tricky with those little inner pieces, so just be careful when you cut such small areas. And I just peel it away with my blade and then use my tools to smooth that out. Perfect. Now let's put it on thin black fondant, and all this fondant does have Tylose. Do I have to say that again? So it's just easier to cut when it has the Tylose powder in it. And I want to get really close and cut an even black border around all of the yellow pieces and smoothing my cuts. Now I have thin pink fondant, and I want this fondant to be in one piece. So I want to first line everything up and make sure this fits, and thank God that it does. And then I'm going to put water on the back and carefully put them down, evenly space them out. And now I want to cut a little bit of a thicker pink border around, going around all the contours of the letters. And it has these little dots in the middle of some of those letters. So I just got a tiny piping tip and just cut a couple round dots out. Round dots, they're all round. I have this tiny paintbrush and a little bit of black petal dust. And I'm just going to deepen those inner lines just to give it a little more interest. This is going on a 7-inch cake. I have a 7-inch cake dummy and just drying it to the correct shape. Now let's do the skate. Now I couldn't find the picture for the skate, but this is a cake that I made and I was just able to print that out so I could do the same skate as I did before. And again, thin white fondant, I'm tracing the outline. I'm making a note of where all those 5 little laces go. And for the wheels, I'm first cutting out the centerpiece and then cutting out the outside. And the size of the cutters that you use is all going to depend on how big your skate is. I just like to hold the cutters up and find whichever one is the correct size. So cut that out, smooth my cuts. I found a tip that is the same size as the laces, or the lace holes, if you will, and just getting some water on the back and putting them down. And these 2 colors are going to be the center of the wheel. And I want to trace out the center of the little stopper as well. And just getting that into position and using my tools to make sure that it has an even border. I have thicker black fondant with Tylose powder in it. And let's align everything on here first. I want to make sure that I have enough space to cut an even border around the entire thing. Once I have it in place, then I can lift up the piece and get a little bit of water underneath on the white part and then gently lay that back down. For bigger pieces, I like to do that. For smaller pieces, I could just lift the entire thing up and get some water on and then put it back down. And putting in the center pieces for the wheels as well. And again, I'm making a shallow cut. So this bottom part, it goes straight across like a skate. So I'm not going to the contour of the bottom of the skate, but for everywhere else, I'm just doing a little border around it. And then once I have that shallow cut, I put my knife all the way down to the board like I did before and cut it out. That way I'm not going to mess up the fondant. Once I peel it away, I'm going to just smooth out all my cuts. I like to do it on the back and then flip it over and then do it from the front. So I have this little strip cutter here and I'm going to cut the laces. So pressing down and then rub my hand on top of it and then take it out. I have this little ball tool and I'm just going to make the holes in all of these little lace holders. I don't know what they're called. Cut a little point and then get a little bit of water on the back. Flip it over and put the point in where the little hole is. And I'm just going to use that tool to just stick it in the hole and then wrap it to the back of the cake, or I'm sorry, the back of the skate, and then cut off the excess and do that for all the colors. And I want to cut a little star, so I have the star cutter. I can link it below and stick that up there. And now I want to measure. I want to put a 40 there, so I know I have to print it out 1.5 inches. So I'm going to do the same thing, tracing the number, cut it out. Make sure you cut the inside pieces first. It's always easier. And smooth it, and then put it on the background and cut the border around it. You know the process. Now before it dries, I want to get some skewers in it and I'm going to twist it in. I'm not going to jab it in there. So this part only needs to go up like a little bit, like 2 inches. So I'm going in the very center and I'm screwing the skewer in, flip it over, make sure it's not popping out the back or the front. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other one, making sure I get directly in the center. This is why I roll out that bottom piece a little thicker, and let's set that aside. Now I want to do the borders. I'm doing a Rubik's Cube border, so I have this square cutter, and I want to make sure that I cut a ribbon wide enough that's going to fit the squares, and that looks like it's perfect. So I'm cutting a ribbon that wide for the bottom, or for the top, and then for the bottom, for the PacMan one, I'm doing a little bit thinner. I can link that ribbon below. And then for the Rubik's Cube, I want to cut out a bunch of squares in all of the Rubik's Cube colors, so all this fondant is rolled out really thin. And I have my cake out of the fridge, and I'm going to do, let's mark the front so I don't get confused. And here's I'm going to stack it. So I'm going to link my stacking tutorial below. It goes into depth on how I stack cakes, but I'm going to measure my straws, cut the straws, put all the straws in, make sure it's level, get a little bit of buttercream down, and then I have clean hands. My hands are clean before I touch a cake. Put the top tier on and make sure it's center and dowel it. Cover the little hole with some buttercream. And now I want to put the lettering on here. This cake is solid. The icing is not going to get messed up. It's hard and cold. So I'm just putting it on here and tracing with my Dresden tool so I can get the impression on there. And I have a little bit of piping gel. I want to put the borders on. So let's start at the back of the cake. And I like to put piping gel where the ribbon is going to meet. And then around the rest of the cake, I like to use a little bit of shortening. The shortening is more forgiving so I can press the ribbon into place. I'm going to start in the back and then wrap it around the cake and cut it where it meets. And I like to use my palette knife and press it down to make sure it's meeting the cake, and let's do the same thing for the bottom. And this looked a little too like gray, so I'm taking a little bit of shortening on a brush and brushing it on there to deepen it and make it look blacker like the bottom tier. And then once I did that, I can take a paper towel and wipe off the excess, and now it's the same color as the bottom tier. I have some piping gel, and let's put all of these squares on. So I'm starting in the very front because I want it to be center. Make sure I have an even space in between each square and the top and the bottom. So I want it to be like a Rubik's Cube, but it's just the pattern. It's not actually a Rubik's Cube, but I spaced it out perfectly, and those skewers were a little long, so I took some snips and cut it, get some piping gel under the wheel so it sticks to the cake, and stick that down on the top. And now I'm taking a little palette knife and just pressing the icing down where it got a little messed up where I put the skate on. And let's put that back in the fridge. Let's make the pellets. I have some thicker white fondant. Put a piece of plastic over it and make sure it's tight. And then I'm just cutting little holes out of there, or circles, with the piping tip. And the plastic is going to give it a rounded appearance. And then I just want to smooth all my cuts like always. And now I printed these out. These are edible images. I measured them before I printed out. I want to write with an edible marker, New Kids on the Block, and a little heart after that because who doesn't love Jordan? And Fame. These are the two tapes that she wanted on there. And I'm going to cut these out. I have a full tutorial explaining how I print and use edible images, and I will link that below. And I'm going to get some piping gel all the way to the edges on the back of these images, and then flip it over and put it down on this fondant. This black fondant is thicker, so it'll be like the thickness of a cassette tape, and I can easily use a pizza cutter to cut this out. And I just want to smooth my cuts like always and set that aside. You can see how thick it is here. And same thing for the other piece, except I'm going to put this on a thinner piece of black fondant. And I can use a circle cutter to cut that one out and smooth out my cuts. Now I have my cake out of the fridge again, and I want to write on it. I have a tip number 3 on here, resting my elbow on something and supporting my right hand with my left hand. I hate writing on cakes. I get so shaky. So this is even sped up twice as fast, and look how slow it is. So just tracing over the letters that I engraved in earlier. And get a little piping gel on the back of here and putting that piece down. And now let me figure out where I want to put PacMan. I want to make sure that I have the name in the right spot so the PacMan and the ghost will fit underneath. So get a little bit of piping gel just on the bottom half because the top half is going to stick up over the cake. Make sure that's center and put that on. Get a little bit of piping gel on the back of PacMan. And do I want the ghost right in front of him? I feel like it looks good if the ghost is in front rather than right behind him. It just gives it a little more visual interest. So let's do that. I have some piping gel on the back of the ghost. Let's angle a toothpick down into it and then push the ghost down. This is just going to help it keep it a little extra secure rather than just using piping gel. And get a little bit of piping gel on the bottom of the tape. And when I put the cassette tape on here, I want the tape to be straight. I don't want to wrap it around the cake. And with the pellets, what I do is I get a little low so I'm even with the cake, and when I put them on, I want to make sure that they fit over the cassette. And when I put them on, I want to make sure that these are all in the same straight line. So I'm down low at the same level with the cake to make sure that they all look even. And then the tape looks good there, and I have a little piping gel behind it, and let's put that back in the fridge. And I have a curly addiction, so here's how I make the curlies. Cut a straight line and then a little bit on the left side, a little bit on the right side, so it comes to a point at both ends. And then wrap it around my Dresden tool and set it aside. All this, this fondant has Tylose powder, so this is able to hold its shape. So again, cut the straight line and then the little lines down the side to get really thin strips and wrap it around the Dresden tool. Get the cake back out of the fridge. And I did this off camera, but I cut some triangles and squares out of the fondant that I was using before. And I just thought it needed a little more visual interest on the top tier, and then get a little bit of piping gel underneath each curly and sticking the curlies all on the cake on the top tier, on the middle tier, and on the cake board. And because I have a curly addiction, I save my extras. So just pouring them in there and keeping them in an airtight container. And there is the cake.
So there you go. How adorable is that 80s themed cake? I love the 80s themes, like the bright neon colors and the crazy shapes. And I miss cassette. Well, I don't really miss cassette tapes. Those were a pain in the butt. But the nostalgia of it all, I just love it. So how did I come up with this design? I was given a picture, and I'll put it over here, and she said she wanted something like this. She said instead of the glove to do a skate on the top and to include the Rubik's Cube. Now, this is my thought process, and a lot of people ask me how I design my cakes, and I don't know how to tell you. It's just in my head. So when I'm looking at this design, I'm looking at, like she said, she wanted the Rubik's Cube. You don't have to always do the exact thing. You can do the pattern or something that represents it. So that's why I decided to do the Rubik's Cube pattern as a border. And then PacMan, like every time I see PacMan, it's done kind of like the bottom tier of that cake where you do the board with all the pellets and the small PacMan. I'm like, what if I made PacMan and the ghost really big? This was just something that I'm trying to think of how to do it a little differently. So that's why I made PacMan and the ghost big and did the pellets around the bottom. And I did that blue border around the bottom to represent the little lines that are separating the, I don't know, like the levels. I don't know. You know what I mean? The little blue, the blue parts on the game of PacMan. And then since she said she wanted a skate, I've done a skate before. Like I showed you in the video, I just printed it out from the cake that I did before, and I love that skate. So I thought it would be perfect on there. And she also asked that it would say made in 1982. So as I was doing that, I'm trying to think, how can I make this a little different rather than just writing the whole thing out? That's why I did the words made in, and then I tried to think of how to do 1982, and I found an image and I thought it was perfect. So I printed that out and put that on there. And like I said in the video, I use edible images all the time. I have videos on teaching you how I do that, and I also have an affiliate link to Icing Images, which I love. I've been shopping there forever, and I recently became an affiliate with them. So if you wanted to check out their stuff, there is a link in the description below. There is a fruit fly in here, and it is driving me crazy, and I can't get it. Anyway, so this cake did not take 12 minutes, 15 minutes to make. Like I always say, with the magic of editing, I cut it down to a watchable time frame. So just to decorate this cake was probably about 6 hours, I would say. And then baking, filling, icing was another 2.5. So it was about 8.5 hours for me to completely make. And this is 4-inch and 6-inch tiers. And I do have a video showing you how I make 4-inch cakes, and I will also link that in the description below. And how much did I charge for this? This one was $375. And I did get a text from her after I sent her the picture, and she absolutely loved it, which just made my day. So I think that's it. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below. And you can keep in touch on social media and check out my website. It's listed in the description below as well. And if you want to stick around, you can watch these 2 videos next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Please like this video if you liked it. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, it's cake. Have fun. Don't be so serious. I will see you on the next one. Bye.